Introduction and Preface of The Chinese Dragon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. Introduction and Preface of The Chinese Dragon by Luther Newton Hayes. Introduction. The subject of this little book is of general interest to people who are acquainted with things Chinese. The dragon has played a large part in Chinese thought through 4,000 and more years. Even in these days of the Republic, it still fills an important place in Chinese life. The dragon is one of the most common ornamental designs in China, and one meets it wherever one goes in this country. However, in spite of the significance attached to the dragon, very little has ever been written concerning it in either Chinese or English. Only a few general articles on this subject have been published in magazines, and the references to it in books are very brief. No independent study of the dragon in book form has been made in either of these two languages until now. The author is peculiarly fitted to undertake this piece of work. He was born in China and speaks the Chinese language as a native. Thus, he has had the first-hand knowledge and the language to help him in his study. He has been studying on the subject of the dragon for 14 years. In this time, he has traveled over more than half the number of provinces of China. The study is therefore not the result of a few months' investigation, nor is it the product of research in only one city or province. The author's acquaintance with the people and the language of China have made it possible for him to go to original sources and to study the subject from every angle. Perhaps the last word on the Chinese dragon is not yet said. Nevertheless, it is safe to say that this treatise is as complete as our present knowledge will permit. This little volume should be of value to all who are interested in China. This account of the dragon will not only be of value to foreigners, but it will also be such to Chinese. The author has made this study a hobby for many years, and the result of his research is a splendid contribution to the literature on China. It would be a good idea for more people to take up the study of other phases of Chinese life in the same way, and thus help to interpret China to the West. Fong F. Sec. May 9, 1922. Preface. In the spring of 1909, the writer had the honor of being a guest for a week in the summer home of Dr. W. A. P. Martin, near Peking. Many residents of the capital during the decade preceding the Revolution, and for a number of years before that, knew Pearl Grotto, and visited the venerable senior missionary of China, then lately retired from the presidency of the Imperial Tongwan College. Dr. Martin was a scholar of the old school, and enjoyed few pursuits better than that of reviewing his remarkable memory of the classical writers. During the meals, the old gentleman, then nearly 80, would quote readily from Homer, Horace, and Virgil, and would ask his guest to translate the passages freely into English, and to cite the books and chapters quoted. After a few days in this uncomfortable situation, the guest began to cast about for some means of relief. At that time he had been in the country but a few months, and was just beginning a general study of Chinese art. The dragon, among other objects of interest, particularly attracted his attention. It occurred to him to ask Dr. Martin some questions about this creature, whose form was so popular with the Chinese. Accordingly, a carefully prepared list of 6 or 7 questions about the dragon was launched one morning across the breakfast table before the attack of Greek and Latin began. The first question met with a non-committal reply. The second fared little better, and so on to the end. Then Dr. Martin admitted that this was one of the subjects about which he knew very little. He was, however, very warm in his desire to help find answers to these questions, and he referred his guest to his personal friend, Sir Robert Hart, the Inspector General of the Imperial Customs, who had also lived 50 years in China. Unfortunately, Sir Robert's replies were as vague as those of the retired professor. The questions which were asked of these two eminent sinologues were also submitted to several other British and Americans in Peking, and later to many Chinese, but with similar results. It soon became evident that if the searcher for light on things Chinese were to learn much about this creature which had challenged his attention, he must look it up from original sources. He was later convinced of this fact when he found it impossible to secure any satisfactory information from books published in English. He then resolved that before he himself was 15 years in the country, he would have answers to the 7 questions which he had asked of his friends in Peking. The contents of this brochure are the results of a study made in 10 provinces of China over a period of 14 years. While this volume is not offered as the final word upon this subject, it probably represents the most exhaustive study thus far given to the Chinese dragon. This book is not intended primarily for sinologues, and it contains no Chinese characters. The volume is written for the average reader, who in his study of things Chinese has little time to go to original sources. Most people do not wish to be burdened with long quotations to prove abstract hypotheses, or to have Chinese characters inserted in the text repeatedly to break the sequence. If later interest in this subject justifies it, a larger work will be attempted, and a more detailed presentation of the material thus far collected will be made. The writer's purpose in this book has been to make as clear a statement of the subject as could be done within the compass of a small book, without introducing unnecessary material. If he has succeeded in this endeavor, he will be more than gratified. Illustration: Bronze Dragon, Kangxi Period. 300 years ago, Pero Verabest, Jesuit priest at the court of Kangxi, cast a number of bronze astronomical instruments for his imperial patron. The apparatus, of which this is a part, stands in the open, but the workmanship is so perfect, and the care it has received has been so faithful, that one would hardly imagine that this dragon was cast more than 3 centuries ago. Illustration: Dragon Colonnade at Chufu. 10 stately stone columns in the portico before the Confucian Temple at Chofu, Shantung. This temple stands near 2 of China's most sacred shrines, the sites of the birthplace and of the grave of China's greatest sage. The pillars are monoliths of white marble, nearly 20 feet in height. These are decorated with huge dragons in deep relief. This is said to be the most perfect and most beautiful stone colonnade in China. Illustration: Emperor Kangxi in dragon robes. Kangxi, the venerated patron of art and literature, died at the age of 69, after ruling China for 61 years. This portrait was painted in the imperial palace at Peking shortly before he died in 1723. Illustration: The Dragon Throne of the recent emperors. This massive structure, surmounted by countless dragons, stands in the imperial palace at Peking. From the dragon throne issued the decrees which, before the Republic, controlled the destinies of 1/4 of the human race. End of Introduction and Preface. Chapters 1 and 2 of The Chinese Dragon by Luther Newton Hayes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 1. The Place of the Dragon in Chinese Life. There are real dragons living in China today. These are not the horrible monsters that some have imagined them to be. They are friendly creatures, highly revered by all the people. They possess marvelous powers, and they occasionally permit themselves to be seen by mortal eyes. Such is the belief of at least 7 out of every 10 Chinese. The popular belief in the dragon is so deeply rooted and so widespread that it is advisable for one to secure an accurate knowledge of the Chinese idea of the venerated saurian if he desires to gain a truly sympathetic understanding of this remarkable people. Nearly every phase of Chinese life bears evidence of the influence of this unique member of the animal kingdom. Particularly is this true in the realms of their art, literature, folklore, zoology, history, and religion. Chinese art employs dragon designs in endless variety. The graceful lines of its symmetrically proportioned body are found in every part of the country painted upon silks and porcelain, woven into brocades, carved on wood, embroidered upon satin, cast in bronze, and chiseled upon marble. It is the most characteristically Chinese of the many Oriental designs which are so attractive to Western students of art. The literature of the country abounds in references to this marvelous creature, as one may readily discover by even a cursory study of its books of history, poetry, letters, medicine, and fiction. Chinese folklore is replete with countless entertaining stories of the wonderful feats of this great animal, while an infinite number of proverbs and old folks' sayings bear their testimony to the almost universal belief in its existence. Popular zoology places the dragon next to man, at the head of the list of all living creatures, thus occupying the position of the lion or tiger in our Western classification. Strictly speaking, Chinese natural history gives the dragon the rank of king only of scaly-covered animals or creatures which live in the sea. The two fabulous creatures, the Chi Ling and the Phoenix respectively, have first place above all beasts and other animals which live upon the earth, and all birds and other creatures which fly in the air. But because the dragon is equally at home in the air and on the earth, as well as in the sea, it has been ranked as the ruler of all created life below man. Chinese geomancy for ages has looked to the dragon as a means of determining the fates and fortunes of the sons of Han. Until very recently, comparatively few Chinese would build a house or bury a corpse without first consulting a geomancer, who would, in one way or another, refer to its probable influence upon his action. It is, moreover, a generally accepted belief that every 12th hour, day, month, and year of the lunar calendar are under the dragon's dominating control. Chinese history records scores of appearances of the King of Beasts through the 4,000 or more years since the age of the three mythical rulers. Appearances of the dragon are connected with the stories of many prominent characters of China's past. Perhaps the most noteworthy reference is one which states that two dragons, as guards of honor, visited the home of Confucius on the day that great sage was born. These frequent references to the dragon are considered, for the most part, by the majority of Chinese scholars, quite as authentic as the statements about the famous worthies themselves. Chinese religion places the dragon in the calendar of its deities as the god of rain and the ruler of rivers, lakes, and seas. As such, it has been worshipped for centuries. There are probably very few cities of any size in the whole country which, at least until the recent revolution, were without a temple or shrine to the Dragon King. This deity was worshipped on the 1st and 15th of every month. In the opinion of the writer, dwellers in other lands commonly think of the dragon in much the same light as they think of the centaurs of Geryon or the minotaur of Grecian fables, a strange mythical creature merely the product of human fancy. It is also probable that most of them think that the majority of Chinese consider it in the same way. But this is a mistaken conception. It may be considered a very conservative estimate to state that at least 360 million Chinese believe in the actual existence of dragons as firmly as other peoples believe that there are such animals as tigers roaming in the jungles of Bengal, and such monsters as walruses wandering over the icy stretches which border the Arctic Circle, though they themselves may never have set foot upon the shores of India, nor have crossed the Arctic Sea. Quite recently, the writer made a localized study of the universality of the belief in dragons. 100 representative Chinese of different ages and walks in life in an important city were asked the following questions. Do you believe in the present existence of the dragon? And what percentage of the people of China do you think hold this belief? 82 of the 100 answered the first question in the affirmative. Regarding the universality of the belief in the dragon, these men estimated that at least 86 6/10% of their fellow nationals believe in its existence. The above study bore out very accurately the writer's estimate of the extent of the popular belief in the dragon. His judgment was based upon questions asked many scores of Chinese in 10 different provinces of the country through a period of 14 years. Illustration: The Han Dynasty Dragons. The brick upon which these dragons are molded was baked 2,000 years ago. It was dug up recently near Kaifengfu in Hunan Province, one of the ancient capitals of China. When two dragons appear in art, they usually face each other. On this ancient brick the reverse is true. The circle through which these animals have wound themselves has become, in modern art, a disc. Most dragons are portrayed gazing intently at the disc, which is usually described as the sun. The simplicity of these dragons is very marked, in contrast to the elaborate designs of the present day. Illustration: The porcelain dragon screen. 9 huge dragons of many colors disport themselves upon this imperial screen. It is approximately 100 feet long and 20 feet high. This impressive structure, faced with porcelain tiles of the finest texture, stands on the edge of the North Sea, within the walls of the Imperial Palace at Peking. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. How the Dragon Idea Originated. The elaborate conception of the dragon, which we find today in Chinese art and literature, is undoubtedly a very different animal from the one which was responsible for the origin of the dragon idea. The fabled sea serpent, the alligator, the salamander, and the boa constrictor have each been regarded as the prototype of this unique creature. It is far more likely, however, that some antediluvian saurian was the true source from which the dragon idea has sprung. Back in the dawn of history, some early member of the human race may have met with one of these monstrous creatures, which paleontologists tell us were, in some period of their development, equally at home on land and in the sea, and because of its gigantic size and marvelous powers attributed to it, a supernatural origin. In later ages, even the unearthed skeleton of one of these monsters might have been sufficient to have led to the inception of the story. If this theory is correct, it is easy to understand how through succeeding ages the belief would have grown, and how superstition and coincidence would have done their share to elaborate from the early monster the marvelous creature of the present day. According to the theory advanced above, the writer believes that the most probable prototype of the dragon is the Brontosaurus of the Mesozoic age, although the present conception of the dragon may easily have sprung from such other prehistoric animals as the Plesiosaurus of the same period, or the Iguanodon of the Cenozoic age. Skeletons of these giants of the saurian family and pictures of the reconstructed animals indicate a striking resemblance to the graceful creatures that dominate the art of China. The first appearance of the true dragon, according to the records of what is considered to be authentic Chinese history, occurred some 46 centuries ago, during the reign of Huang Ti, or Huzan Yuan, the third of the 5 great rulers. We are told that after this personage had reigned 111 years, a large dragon appeared, and took him to heaven upon his back. Since that day, dragons have been seen in every dynasty, and by hundreds of witnesses, as Chinese history abundantly attests. Dragon appearances were considered auspicious and augured well for the affairs of state. In support of this belief, it is interesting to note that when the late President Yuan Shikai was trying to make himself emperor, his friends made at least one attempt to unearth what were supposed to be the bones of a dragon. This was done in order that the superstitious among his countrymen might be led to feel that his desire to re-establish the empire was according to the law of heaven. For centuries it was the custom for everyone who saw a dragon, either himself or through the magistrate of the district in which he lived, immediately to announce the fact to the emperor. In early days, history was often counted from the appearance of a particular dragon. A popular fable relates that Yu Wang was able to end the Great Flood, 2297 B.C., only after he had succeeded in capturing the dragon, who was said to be responsible for the deluge. The animal was chained in heavy irons and imprisoned, after which the flood subsided. Ever since that time, all dragons, we are told, have trembled at the memory of the only man who ever conquered their kind. Illustration: The Dragon Staircase. In most Confucian and imperial temples, the center of the path that leads from the temple entrance to the sacred shrine is known as the Spirit Way. Where this route leads up a staircase, one usually finds not steps, but a large inclined stone on which are carved one or more dragons. At the hour of worship, the spirit of the one who is honored travels, we are told, over this course. The dragon monolith shown in this photograph leads up to the smallest, the central one, of the three altars at the Temple of Heaven in Peking. Illustration: An imperial dragon. This lifelike creature, symbolic of imperial power, adorns one of the walls within the palace ground of Peking. Here, as in most representations, the dragon is shown gazing longingly at the flaming sun. He desires, we are told, not so much to seize that heavenly body, as to learn the secret of its brilliance, so that it may add to his own glory. End of Chapter 2. Chapters 3 and 4 of The Chinese Dragon by Luther Newton Hayes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3. The Varieties of Dragons. To the majority of people, the word dragon denotes one animal only. There are, however, at least 8 species of animals which bear this name. These are the lung wang, the xin lung, the li lung, the chao lung, the yang lung, the chiu lung, the cao chung, and the tu lung. They all belong to the genus dragon, lung, but each has one or more characteristics which differentiates it from the others. For example, the li lung, or chi lung, as it is also named, has and is the only species which possesses wings. It is, however, but one of these species, the Shen Lung, which will be considered at this time. Of the 8 varieties, this is the one best known. The others may be dismissed with a word. Dr. Williams, in his Middle Kingdom, mentions only 3 varieties, and says that these are respectively dragons of the sky, of the sea, and of marshes. However, it seems that the Chinese are not generally accustomed to make such a classification. They rather consider that the one species, Shen Lung, controls and operates in all of these 3 spheres. Most of the other varieties are minor creatures which are practically unknown, and have slight bearing upon this study. The one exception to this rule is the Lung Wang, or Dragon King. This species differs from the others in that its members possess a dragon's head upon a human body. By some, this dragon is said to answer to Neptune in Western mythology. Each ocean has a dragon king. The members of this species differ from those of the one in which we are the most interested, in that dragon kings rarely grow old and never die. The remaining varieties are all quite secondary, and practically never appear in any form of art. These are mentioned only occasionally in Chinese literature. This article will therefore be confined to an account of the Shen Lung, or spirit dragon, the real dragon, the dragon which has held China in its spell since the days of Yao and Shung. All true dragons are of two kinds, those which are such by birth, and those which become dragons by transformation from fish of the carp species. The transformed variety become dragons by leaping up the waters of a certain cataract upon a western mountain stream. Large numbers of carp swim once each year, we learn, to this waterfall, known as the Dragon's Gate. Here, under the cataract, they flounder about, jumping and springing up out of the swirling waters. A few of them succeed in getting over the falls to the higher waters above. Those which are successful in this effort become dragons. After the story of this strange occurrence became known to the public, it was incorporated into the life of the people in a popular saying, and scholars who succeeded in passing the great triennial literary examinations were said to have passed the Dragon Gate. The use of this figure was doubtless to illustrate the difficulty of passing the examinations, for it implied that it was as difficult a task for a man to succeed at these examinations as it was for the carp to leap up over the falls. This figure has, in addition, the happy inference that even as the carp, an ordinary fish, might become a mighty dragon, just so, by this supreme effort, a scholar might become a master of arts, thus placing the value of the transformation on a very high scale. One ancient authority tells us that there is a class of these great saurians which are known as lazy dragons. These do not like to exert themselves in the task of directing clouds, which carry rain over the surface of the earth. They sometimes make themselves small in size, drop to the surface of the earth, and hide in trees, under roofs of houses, and even in the clothing of unsuspecting countrymen. The thunder god, learning of their desertion from their posts of duty, sends his messengers to search for them, and when he discovers their location, kills them with thunderbolts during an electric storm, after the manner of Zeus. This explains to many an unsophisticated man the frequent destruction of life and property during thunderstorms. An epithet that in some parts of the country is often hurled at lazy people is Lan Lung, or lazy dragon. Illustration: Tablet to Confucius. This red lacquer tablet, inscribed with 8 characters in gold, stands in the shrine of the provincial temple of Chenkang at Hangzhou. The inscription may be freely translated, "The sacred tablet of our revered teacher Confucius." The tablet is approximately 4 feet high and 1 foot wide. 9 dragons play hide and seek in the framework that borders the edge of the inscription. 2 larger dragons twine themselves about the slender pillars before the shrine. These serve as guards of honor. These 2 creatures symbolize the 2 dragons which, history says, encircled the home of Confucius when the sage was born. Similar tablets are found in all temples to Confucius throughout China. Illustration: Dragon Gateway. Within the main entrance to Nanking's examination hall, where the master's degree was earned, stood a long spirit wall. Upon the front of this structure was painted a dragon gate, beneath which was shown a carp changing into a dragon. A Bachelor of Arts, according to China's ancient system of education, upon becoming a master, was congratulated by his friends as having passed through the Dragon Gate. The implication was that it was as difficult for a Bachelor of Arts to become a master as for a carp to be transformed into a dragon. Illustration: The Dragon Stone. In the city of Kaifengfu, Honan, the first capital of the Sung emperors, is a sacred building known as the Dragon Pavilion. Within this structure, which stands on an eminence high above most of the buildings of the city, is a large basaltic stone known as the Dragon Throne. This is cut in the form of a cube of about 6 feet in each dimension, and rests today under the shrine of the Pearly Emperor. 900 years ago the Sung emperors doubtlessly placed their lacquered thrones upon its upper surface. In order to protect it from Vandal hands, the historic stone is now encased within wooden walls, which form a cave-like room about it. 14 dragons in deep relief surround the outer edge, 5 on the front and back faces, and 2 on either end. Visitors must use candles in order to see at all in the inky darkness. Because of the narrow quarters, no photograph can be taken. The drawings by a Kaifeng Fu artist was made under the greatest difficulties, and is probably the first reproduction ever attempted. Illustration: Dragon Eaves Tile. This crescent-shaped tile fell from the roof of one of the imperial temples of Peking. It is made of highly glazed porcelain, and is 10 inches across and 5 inches high. Its age is estimated to be about 200 years. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. What Dragons Really Look Like. Comparatively few Chinese of the older generation seem to question the existence of dragons, or to doubt the marvelous powers usually attributed to them. In view of this fact, it is surprising to find how ignorant is the average person who holds this belief when asked to give an accurate description of the great creature. Perhaps this is not strange, however, when we remember that there are apparently no books which purport to give any complete account of the dragon. The innumerable references to it in Chinese literature largely deal with the dragon's performances and say little about his appearance. In order to make a satisfactory study of the dragon, one must therefore follow a tedious process of collecting, eliminating, and coordinating a multitude of stories, proverbs, and incidents from history, and make a careful study of selected pictures and carvings, and, if possible, secure interviews with those who profess to have seen the great king of the animal creation. One writer, who is anxious to make intelligible to the average person the accepted representation of the king of all created life below man, describes the dragon in terms of animals with many of which we are quite familiar. He says that it has the head of a camel, the horns of a deer, the ears of a cow, the neck of a snake, the body of a fish, the scales of a carp, the claws of an eagle, the eyes of a devil, and the paws of a tiger. The bodies of all dragons, we are informed, are symmetrically divided into 3 sections of equal length, these divisions being from the point of the nose to the shoulders, from the shoulders to the thighs, and from the thighs to the tip of the tail. The Shou Wen, a book written during the Tang dynasty, says that the dragon has the following marvelous powers. It may cause itself to become visible or invisible at will, and it can become long or short, and coarse or fine, at its own good pleasure. This wonderful versatility, of course, makes it difficult for us to find any recorded statement of the maximum length of this creature, since there is no limit set for its expansion. Another book of the Tang dynasty helps out a little, however, when it describes a certain dragon which was found dead as having been over 100 feet long, while another account leads us to believe that the dragon at times assumes a size several miles in length. The smallest size of which any statement has been found was the length of a silkworm. In color, dragons are differentiated as being red, yellow, blue, white, or black. During the Manchu dynasty, yellow was the imperial color, and the yellow or golden dragon was designated the imperial dragon. In the preceding dynasty, the Ming dynasty, when red was the national color, it is believed that the red dragon was proclaimed, by decree of the emperor, the official dragon of the empire. Every careful observer in the Far East has noticed a difference in the number of claws in the pictures of dragons, some possessing 3, others 4, and still others 5 claws. The smallest number is found on the dragons of Japanese art. Ordinarily, Chinese dragons have 4 claws, while those of 5 were recognized as imperial dragons. The 2 types of Chinese dragons with these slight variations are, however, one and the same species, and are identical in every other respect. An attempt has been made to prove that the variation of claws from 3 through 4 to 5 is a historic development, but we can find no conclusive proof to substantiate this theory. It is possible that the ancient dragon designs of China have only 3 claws on each foot. Japan borrowed her art from China, and it is not unlikely that at the period when she borrowed this design, the Chinese dragon was represented with only 3 claws. It is said of the carp that it always has exactly 36 scales in each row, leading from its head to its tail. After the same manner, dragons are described as possessing 81 scales in each series. The true dragon has 9 sons. Each is different in appearance from the other, and each possesses his own peculiar characteristics. These children of the dragon are the variants in appearance from the general line which we are accustomed to look for in the dragon, and which we often see in carvings and architecture. The dragon heads on bells, on the peak tiles of temples and palaces, on sword hilts, on monuments, and in similar places, are representations of the progeny of the god of rain, and do not portray that god himself. Illustration: Dragon-guarded astrolabe. This exquisitely wrought bronze instrument for measuring the position of the stars may be seen in Peking. It stands at the foot of the ramp leading to the Imperial Observatory. 300 years ago the Jesuit astronomer Varieties had this and a score of other magnificent instruments cast for the Emperor Kangxi. Most of these great pieces are surmounted or protected by dragons of the finest workmanship. Illustration: Surrounded by dragons. This palace portrait was a prized possession of the Manchu emperors. Yung Cheng, the son of Kangxi, is here shown upon the throne, which he ascended in 1723. Countless dragons disport themselves upon his costly robe of state, and writhe and wreathe themselves in the lattice structure of his imperial throne. Illustration: A dragon-mounted bell. 3 dragons unite themselves to form the structure from which hangs this graceful bell. The frame is of redwood from southern China, and like much of the carvings from the city of Fuchao, it is richly inlaid with silver. A 4th dragon coils over the surface of the bell. 2 dragon-like heads unite to form the loop by which the bell is hung. These represent one variety of the 9 sons of the king of the animal world. Illustration: A cloud dragon. One of the men who claimed to have seen a living dragon was by profession an artist. This medallion was drawn by him. Except for the whiskers, this painting represents what I saw when a young man in Shantung Province. The cloud dragon is a favorite theme of artists. Dragons are supposed to travel about upon the clouds. It is a common belief, and one which was held also by Confucius, that clouds spring from dragons. An ancient and well-known saying declares, "Clouds come from dragons and wind from tigers." End of Chapter 4. Chapters 5 and 6 of The Chinese Dragon by Luther Newton Hayes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5. People Who Have Seen Dragons. In spite of the fact that modern zoology has never included in the pages of its textbooks descriptions and pictures of the dragon as a creature of reality, yet there are men in China today who claim to have seen these animals, some of which have been described very accurately. The writer has had the pleasure of conversing with several Chinese who assert that they have seen the dragon at close range. He has also secured, at second hand, information from others who are said to have looked upon this most marvellous of creatures. All of the men whom the writer interviewed were of sound mind, and were accredited by their acquaintances with being men of reliable character. There is no reason to believe that any one of them are inebriate or under the power of hallucination at the time they witnessed the creatures of their description. A teacher in a Tsintian school related that he once saw a dragon in his native province, Shantung. The animal had been killed, so it was believed, by the order of heaven, as a punishment for some misdeed, and had fallen to the earth, where it lay as the centre of attraction for hundreds of people who came in crowds from the whole countryside. Its appearance was identical with that of the popular pictures with which we are familiar. A school servant, who was also a native of Shantung, and whose home was near the sea, declared that he once saw a dragon. He told the writer that it was about 15 feet long, and that it fell to the earth during a severe rainstorm. It, too, attracted a large crowd of spectators. Although this man was unable to give very satisfactory details, yet his unusual earnestness and apparent sincerity were convincing evidence that he had really seen a monster of a remarkable type. A third person, an elderly gentleman, who is a teacher of classics in one of the schools of Nanking, informed the writer that when he was a young man, a dragon fell one night from the sky, and lay for 24 hours near his home. The country folk respectfully covered it with matting, but he managed to raise the covering, and saw its great cow-like head, its 4 legs, and its scale-covered body. It was about 50 feet long, and blue in color. As in the other 2 cases, this dragon disappeared from the earth during a heavy storm. It was generally believed that it came to life again, and was taken up into the heavens upon a cloud, which formed beneath its body. The artist who drew the picture of the cloud dragon recounted that during the 34th year of the Emperor Quan Tzu, while he himself was on his way to Peking to receive the seals of a district magistrate, he came across a dragon lying upon the banks of the Yellow River in Shantung Province. It was blue in color, and was several tens of feet in length. The whole air was filled with a very offensive salt sea odor, and out of respect for the creature, which was supposed to have fallen from heaven, the crowd of people that stood around was busily engaged in sprinkling water upon its body. The head resembled that of a cow, and the artist said that, except for the long eyebrows, the picture of the cloud dragon represented very faithfully what he actually saw. Another Chinese has related that a business partner of his, while on a journey up the Yangtze River, saw 3 dragons crossing a mountain range near the shore. Every person on board was spellbound as they watched the 3 monsters, one yellow, another white, and the third blue, as they majestically made their way with great undulating strides up the mountainside. The dragons passed by so near the boat that the observers saw every detail of their heads and the lace-like scales of their bodies. The boat was respectfully stopped in mid-river, and only when the dragons had disappeared over the ridge did the boatmen resume their task at the oars. Various stories have come to the writer of dragons which have been seen either riding upon banks of fog or dangling from passing clouds during great windstorms or rainstorms. Invariably these have been described as having scale-covered bodies. One reasonable explanation for the suspended dragons may be found in incipient tornadoes and waterspouts which never reach the ground. There seems, however, to be no explanation for the dragon visits described by the 5 observers, unless it be that strange monsters of the deep either crawled up out of the river and lay on the bank in a dormant state, or were sucked up by ocean or river waterspouts, and, when the columns of water broke over the land, the creatures were dropped far from their natural habitat. 2 difficulties at once present themselves to combat this hypothesis. The first of these is the improbability that there are such creatures in existence, and the second difficulty lies in the strangeness of their disappearance after coming to the earth. As a possible explanation of the first difficulty, we wish to ask whether it is not possible that there are still existing in the depths of the sea and in great rivers curious reptiles and strange monsters such as no human beings now living have ever seen, the descendants of the mighty saurians which lived upon the earth long ages ago, and which geologists tell us later entered the sea, making that their more secretive habitat. As an explanation for the disappearance of the dragon in these three instances, the writer notes two facts. The dragons in each case were seen on the banks of great rivers, and in each case disappeared after a heavy rain. Might it not have been that the monsters were in reality not dead, but only unconscious, and that the heavy flood washed the creatures back into the river, whence they were carried out to sea? Illustration: Circular Dragon Eve's Tile. This tile was found in the debris near the Ming tomb of Nanking. The body of Chu Yung Chang, the founder of the Ming dynasty, and the only emperor buried in the imperial cemetery east of Nanking, was interred about 1399. This tile is of dark yellow porcelain, 8 inches in diameter. It is probably 500 years old. Illustration: Xin Lung vases. These two dainty porcelain vases of the Qin Yung period were burned a little over 100 years ago. The paws of the dragon each contain 5 claws. Creamy clouds and red flames of fire fill in the background, while conventional green waves decorate the base. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Dragon in Western Mythology. The dragon is not a conception of the Chinese mind alone. It also occupies a prominent place in the legends and literature of most of the countries of Europe. Cicero, in his De Divinatione, Book 2, line 30, Euripides in his Philostratus, Book 1, line 2, and Homer in the Iliad, Book 2, line 309, all mention a dragon. The Bible, in 22 references in the Old Testament and 13 instances in the New, refers to the dragon either allegorically or as a real animal. However, in many of these passages, especially in the Old Testament, the word dragon is an unfortunate rendition, for in several places the writers of the Scriptures very evidently had the conception of an animal that was in all probability the modern jackal. The myths and legends of Europe have preserved for us numerous dragon stories with which we are more or less familiar. Among others are the tale of Perseus, who rescued Andromeda from a dragon, the story of St. George and the dragon, the account of Siegfried, who killed a dragon at Worms, and the story of Beowulf, who in the early days of history's dawn dispatched a dragon after slaying Grendel. King Arthur, who was spoken of as the Dread Pendragon, is described by Tennyson in his Idylls of the King as sitting upon a veritable dragon throne, which would vie in splendor with that of China's Manchu emperors. The vivid imagination of the poet laureate gives us this picture: To his crown the golden dragon clung, and down his robe the dragon writhed in gold, and from the carven work behind him crept 2 dragons gilded, sloping down to make arms to his chair, while all the rest of them, through knots and loops and folds innumerable, fled ever through the woodwork till they found the new design wherein they lost themselves. Many coast and river cities of England, France, Italy, and Egypt still proudly recount their local legends of cruel dragons which were slain, after battles royal, upon nearby rivers or in adjacent seas. We may read of the Green Dragon of Mordeford, the Dragon of Norwich, the Great Dragon of Penintem, the Dragon of Naples, the Dragon of Arles, the Dragon of Lyon, the Dragon of Marseille, Sebec, the Dragon of the Nile, and many more. These stories are proudly treasured as the sacred traditions of their respective cities and countries. The Chinese conception of the dragon presents a very different creature from that of the nations bordering on the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. It is true that there are a few points of similarity, but there is only one to which we shall call attention at this time. That is regarding its keenness of eyesight. Both types are endowed with marvelous vision. The Chinese dragon is deaf, and it is explained that its eyes, through natural compensation, have attained an extraordinary power. His vision is so keen that he can easily distinguish a blade of grass 100 li away. In this connection, it is interesting to recall that the English word dragon is derived from the Greek drakon, which means to gaze or to see, and the classics more than once refer to the animal as sharp-sighted. We do not know who first attached the English name dragon to the Chinese conception lung, but it is hardly fair to the Oriental ruler of the sea to be branded with the stigma which accompanies the English designation. Since the recent revolution, several devout Westerners have been heard to express their great satisfaction that the dragon flag has now forever disappeared. A misconception of the use of the word dragon had caused the speakers to confuse the evil monster mentioned in the Book of Revelation with the animal so highly revered by the Chinese. The dragon of the Chinese differs from the generally accepted Western idea in three striking particulars: in appearance, in disposition, and in the regard in which it is held. In appearance, the European conception varies but slightly from the creature which was its probable prototype, save for the addition of a pair of wings. The Chinese species is developed to a higher degree. The latter has a more massive head, from which protrude two branching horns. This species, with the single exception of the Chi Lung or Li Lung, has no wings, but travels from place to place upon the clouds. A still greater difference between the two varieties exists in the matter of disposition. The European dragon is usually portrayed as a cruel monster, the personification of all that is evil, and the enemy of man. Christian art represents it as opposed to law, harmony, and progress, and symbolic of sin and paganism. In this allegorical sense, it is painted in struggles with St. George, St. Michael, and St. Sylvester, who personified Christianity and enlightenment. Saints and martyrs are pictured in the process of crushing the dragon beneath their feet. The Chinese dragon, on the other hand, is in this respect very nearly its antithesis. It is a beneficent creature, a friend to man. It brings the rain which produces the crops that in turn supply his food. The third point of distinction between the two dragons lies in the esteem in which it is held. The Western species was a horrible, loathsome creature, shunned and dreaded by all mortals, while the Asiatic dragon is held in reverence and even worshipped by the Chinese. This creature is in fact so highly revered that one of the most sacred titles which was bestowed upon the emperors was the True Dragon. Illustration: a living dragon. Most representations of the dragon indicate peaceful, passive creatures. The artist who designed this dragon for the Garden of the Emperors at Peking was a master of his art. This graceful creature fairly throbs with life, and we almost hold our breath as we look with the expectation that it will detach itself from the mural background and launch out into space. It is a living thing, and we feel that in another moment it will jerk back its head and rise to disappear before our very eyes. Illustration: 2 porcelain dragons. Of the 9 huge saurians that play in the emerald waves beneath the pale blue sky on the imperial screen at Peking, no 2 assume the same attitude. Leaping, springing, and lunging, each is struggling to reach the sun disk, which lies just out of reach before its face. End of Chapter 6. Chapters 7 and 8 of The Chinese Dragon by Luther Newton Hayes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7. Quaint Beliefs about the Dragon. The whiskers of the dragon, according to a book of the Yuan dynasty, are 3 feet long and purple in color. If dragon whiskers are mounted upon a crystal handle like a horsehair whip, and are placed in a room at night, flies and mosquitoes will not enter. We are further informed that if this instrument is swished through the air, it will make such a noise that chickens, dogs, cows, and horses, on hearing it, will try to hide. If dragon whiskers are placed in deep water, all scale-covered animals will swim immediately to the spot, thinking that their master, the dragon, is there. A strange fire plays about the body of the dragon. This differs from the fire with which we are familiar, in that it blazes brightly when brought into contact with water. If, however, terrestrial fire touches the dragon flames, the latter will immediately be extinguished. As long as the dragon has moisture in the form of water or clouds surrounding its body, it retains its marvelous powers of motion and of mutability, but when this moisture dries up, the dragon becomes powerless and dies. It is said that the blood of some dragons is red, of others black. Rubies are often supposed to be petrified drops of the red variety. We are informed of the remarkable fact that dragons change their bones periodically, and as regularly as snakes shed their skins and deer their horns. Dragon bones are supposed to be buried in many high mountains, and their presence has much to do with the determination of feng shui. Lofty peaks that are frequently tipped with clouds or enveloped in mist are believed to contain the bones of some great dragon, which attract to themselves the moisture of the passing clouds. The saliva of the dragon, we are told, is purple in color, and is considered the most fragrant of all perfumes. It is said to be employed in the manufacture of a very valuable incense. Dragon saliva incense was formerly sent as a tribute to the emperor by one of the western provinces. One writer expresses a remarkable theory of the dragon's posthumous state. He says that when they die, dragons turn into crabs. Dragons are punished for minor offenses, according to the will of heaven, by having their ears cut off; for greater offenses, by being sent to the earth, where they are exposed to the view of men in a state as if dead. 3 things of which dragons are exceedingly fond are bamboo trees, arsenic, and the flesh of swallows. The graceful branches of the bamboo are very pleasing to the eye of the dragon, who, when there is no human being in sight, delights to lie under their shade and hear the wind rustling the leaves above. Arsenic, which is to mortal man a deadly poison, is food to the dragon. In fact, it is a favorite article of diet, and dragons grow fat upon it. The delicacy, however, for which the dragon has the greatest fondness is swallow's flesh. Woe to the man who ever tries to cross a body of water in a boat after having eaten a dish of roasted swallows, for a peculiar fragrance, which dragons are always able to detect, will cling to his person. The man in the boat will be pursued by one of these animals, who will cause a storm to rise, the boat will be upset, and the unfortunate person precipitated into the water, where he will fall easy prey to the ruler of the sea. Under ordinary conditions, the dragon shows no fondness for human flesh, but with such provocation we are told that he should be considered entirely excusable. In the autumnal equinox, according to one source, the majority of dragons descend into the sea, where they hibernate for 6 months. In fact, the home of dragons is on the floor of the ocean, where they dwell in beautiful palaces. At the vernal equinox, dragons leave the sea and ascend again into the clouds. Destructive typhoons and equinoctial hurricanes along the coast in the spring and autumn are caused by the disturbance of the waters when the great animals thus enter or leave their maritime home. Illustration: the Dragon Square. This insignia of rank was worn on a gown by the great statesman Li Hung Chung. All Manchu officials carried upon the front and back of their robes of state richly embroidered squares like this. The gowns of civil officers bore pictures of birds, while those of military officials had animals. Each of the 9 ranks in both series employed its own distinguishing emblem. The dragon was worn by the Prime Minister, by princes, and the Emperor. Li Hongchang was Prime Minister of China for 20 years. The threads are of gold and silver, and the background is black satin. Illustration: The Dragon Disc. This exquisite design was the insignia worn by a prince of the imperial house of the Qing dynasty. The insignia of the Prime Minister was square like those of lower officials. Princes were distinguished by circular emblems. This dragon disc is 11 inches in diameter and is embroidered with gold and black. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. How Dragons Control the Fortunes of Men. The surface of the earth is believed to be covered with a network of invisible paths of the dragon, known as Lung Mei. People who build their houses or find graves for their dead upon one of these courses are extremely fortunate. The ruling emperors, however, made efforts to prevent their subjects from occupying the positions upon such auspicious sites. When Chao Ming, the founder of the Sung dynasty, while still an unknown young man in reduced financial straits, was forced to move his father's bones, he carried them in a reed bag and buried them by accident upon one of these dragon paths. As a result of this fact, we are told, heaven smiled upon him, and he himself, not long afterward, became an emperor. Within the past few years, a young Chinese who had been studying in Japan committed suicide for political reasons while on his way across the ocean. Because he was so well beloved, he was buried by his friends in a beautiful mountain valley on a dragon path. The Board of Rites in Peking, on hearing of this, ordered the grave removed, sending telegram after telegram to the local magistrates to have the coffin disinterred at once and taken to another spot. Since the Revolution, it is said that the student's body has been taken back to its first resting place. When Chinese observe the natural phenomenon, which in the West is commonly described as the sun drawing up water, they say that what is seen is the dragon sucking up water to form the clouds. When rain falls upon one man's field and not upon his neighbor's, or upon one half of a man's farm and not upon the other, one explanation which is advanced for this fact is that the line which marks the division of dry and wet land is directly beneath the boundary line of the territory governed by 2 different dragons. One sees fit to order rain, while the other does not. The territories controlled by the different dragons are redistributed once each year on the 17th of the 3rd month, which is known as Li Shui, the festival of the beginning of summer. A few amusing illustrations of the way in which dragon superstitions have been allowed to play a leading part in Chinese life have come to the writer's attention. A Tianjin district magistrate, about 40 years ago, tried to make an outlet from the Pei River in order to turn off the water at the time of a flood. After spending too much money in what proved to be an unsuccessful effort, he jumped into the river and was drowned. The story goes that the flood immediately subsided, and the official turned into a dragon. Shortly afterwards he was changed into a snake and was captured. This creature was carried in state into Tianjin City, where it was placed in the Dragon Temple, and was worshipped by the Viceroy of Chili Province, who was none other than Li Hongchang. This official later became Prime Minister, and kept that position for 20 years. In the heart of Wuchang there is a steep hill, which cuts the business part of the city into 2 sections. This hill is so steep that it is practically impossible to carry the traffic over it. Some Chinese claim the hill to be the dwelling place of a tortoise, others of a serpent, and still others of a dragon. Some years ago, when Chang Chi-tung was living in that city as Viceroy of Human and Hupa, he caused a tunnel to be cut through the hill so that communication from one business center to the other would be facilitated. Not long after this was completed, the viceroy began to suffer from a carbuncle on his neck. Chinese and foreign physicians alike failed in their attempts to cure him. At last a geomancer was consulted. "I know the reason for your Excellency's illness," he said without hesitation. "You have caused the dragon's haunt to be penetrated. Block up the tunnel in the hill, and you will get well." The thing was done. The viceroy soon recovered, and faith in the dragon on the part of the people of Wu Chang was more firmly established than ever. It might be added that since the Revolution, the tunnel through the hill has again been opened. Many years ago, large numbers of the students of Hangzhou City failed to pass the Yu Chen, or Master of Arts, examination. The fact sorely puzzled the city magistrates, who lost much face. No explanation could be found for this fact, until a geomancer explained that a dragon living in the mountain range northwest of the city had no room to wag his head, and that a large section of one end of the range must be dug away before Hangzhou students would be able to succeed. The geomancer's suggestion was carried out, the dragon was given the chance he desired, and it is needless to say that since that time all has been well. Illustration: Emperor Kangxi on the Dragon Throne. Kangxi was the second emperor of the Manchu dynasty. He ascended the throne at the age of 8 and ruled China for over 60 years. This portrait was once preserved in the imperial galleries of the Manchu rulers. Illustration: A dragon lantern. The 15th day of the first month of the Chinese year is known as the Feast of Lanterns. For centuries, Chinese in many parts of the country have observed the evening of the 15th with lantern parades. One of the most spectacular of the lanterns usually exhibited is made in the form of a huge dragon. Before the Republic was established, dragon lanterns were not infrequently 75 to 100 feet in length. These were supported by from 25 to 30 men. Occasionally these lanterns were used at other times of the year, more particularly on the 5th of the 5th month of the lunar calendar, a holiday known as the Dragon Boat Festival. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of The Chinese Dragon by Luther Newton Hayes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. The Hold of the Dragon on China. The word dragon occupies a prominent place in the common phraseology of the country. Some illustrations of this fact are as follows. Deaf people are called lung, a character formed by the combination of the dragon and ear characters, signifying a person with ears like a dragon, which, we are informed, is deaf. The asparagus plant is known as dragon's beard grass. The gentian flower is called the dragon's gall. A common variety of pine is known as dragon's tail pine, from the supposed similarity of its branches to the tail of the dragon. Amaryllis lilies and also the blossoms of a certain locust tree are called dragon's claw flowers. This is no doubt on account of the shape of the flower clusters. Fire engines are called water dragons. Locomotives and water faucets are commonly designated as dragon heads. The keel of a ship goes by the name of the dragon bone. Waterspouts are known as dangling dragons. The name was probably given them by junkmen and fishermen, who considered these to be the tails of dragons suspended from the clouds. Spirited horses are said to have dragon dispositions. Betrothal certificates are known as dragon phoenix papers. Wedding cakes are called dragon phoenix cakes. The published list of Master of Arts graduates was known as the Dragon Tiger Register. A large number of cities, prefectures, rivers, and mountains have the character dragon incorporated into their names. One of the largest rivers of Manchuria, and one of its 3 provinces, are named Heilongjiang, Black Dragon River, because it is related that a large black dragon once made its appearance in its waters. One of the most famous mountains of the province of Guangxi is known as the Dragon Tiger Mountain. Perhaps the most popular kind of tea in China is the Dragon's Well tea. This received its designation from the fact that its original home was in a valley of that name. Among the hills on the farther shores of Hangzhou's beautiful West Lake is nestled a monastery on the estate of which is a pool of crystal clear water. From the depths of this well a dragon was once seen to rise. The Dragon's Well is now the name of the monastery and also of the surrounding hills. Tea of this name, though it may never have grown near Hangzhou, is as highly prized in distant Sichuan and in other distant parts of China as it is in the capital of Chenkang Province. In the excellent new encyclopedia recently issued by the commercial press, there are no less than 257 references to the dragon. 51 of these are the names of cities or villages, 24 of mountains and rivers, and 15 the names of flora of various genera. The emperor's most reverential title was the True Dragon, and in harmony with that idea, the word dragon in the adjectival sense was used in names of all that had to do with his life and position. As an example of this, his throne was the dragon's seat. His hands, the dragon's claws. The pen he used was the dragon's brush. The imperial robes were called dragon's garments, and the imperial glance was known as dragon's eyes. The dragon tablet was the name given to the imperial tablet, which was worshipped during the Qing dynasty in every large temple and monastery in the land, and even in Mohammedan mosques. The inscription on the tablet read as follows: "To the reigning emperor, may he live 10,000 years, 10,000 years, 10,000 times 10,000 years." The tablet received its name from the fact that it represented the emperor, the true dragon, and because it bore at its top a dragon's head. One insignia of official rank until the recent revolution was the picture square embroidered in gold and silver thread and worn on the front and back of official robes. The squares worn by civil officers bore the pictures of birds, while those of military officials were decorated with the pictures of animals. Each rank and grade having its corresponding variety of bird or beast. The emperor, the princes, and the prime minister were allowed the special privilege of wearing the dragon on one of these embroidered squares. The round disc on the Chinese dragon flag, which is often pictured before the mouth of the dragon, is explained by some as a pearl, by others as a huge spider metamorphosed into a ball. We are repeatedly told in fables that dragons have a peculiar fondness for teasing spiders. A more satisfactory theory, however, is that the disc represents the sun. According to this explanation, the dragon is not trying to devour the heavenly body, as some would lead us to suppose, but is gazing with a great longing, for it desires to become like the sun in brilliance. In referring to the dragon flag, the fact is worthy of notice that although this design appeared upon Chinese military banners through many centuries, the selection of the dragon emblem as a national insignia was of comparatively recent date. It is probable that the custom of foreign nations of using national emblems had a large part to play with the adoption of a national flag. There is a feeling among many friends of China, and even among a few Chinese as well, that the effect of the Revolution and the passing of the dragon flag will very shortly kill out the dragon idea. This, the writer believes, is impossible. A belief that has gripped the nation for over 40 centuries is not to be shaken even by a great revolution, which, though cataclysmic in itself, yet in relation to the ages which have passed, is little more than a ripple upon the surface of the sea of time. The dragon is neither a symbol of the Manchu dynasty nor a type of absolute monarchy, and has nothing in common with either. The idea is distinctly a heritage of the Chinese race itself, and as such it will probably live as long as this people. It will survive at least until a generation after Western science has permeated and dominated every seaside village, every mountain hamlet, and every inland city, to the remotest bounds and limits of this vast republic. Illustration: a dragon column. This remarkable monolith stands near the entrance to the famous Ming tombs, 30 miles north of Peking. A huge dragon, surrounded by clouds, wraps itself closely about the tall shaft. There are 2 of these columns at the Ming tombs, one on either side of the Spirit Road. The 5-clawed dragons symbolize the imperial nature of the extensive cemetery, where are buried 13 emperors, each in his massive mausoleum. Illustration: the gateway to the Dragon Well. Situated 4 or 5 miles west of the city of Hangzhou is the center of the district that gives its name to what is perhaps the most famous tea in China. This is known as the Lungqing. The tea takes its name from a pool of water called the Dragon Well. The walls of a monastery now surround the pool. This photograph shows the entrance to the temple grounds. The 2 characters over the arch form one of the best-known names in all China. Illustration: the Dragon Tablet. During the Manchu dynasty, practically every Buddhist and Taoist temple of any size had an imperial dragon tablet in a prominent place upon the altar. Usually this stood before the image. The words it bore were these: "To the reigning emperor, may he live 10,000 years, 10,000 years, 10,000 times 10,000 years." In the gilded decoration upon the characters 3 dragons twine themselves. Many such tablets may still be seen, although China has now been a republic for 10 years. This photograph was taken in Hangzhou in March 1922. The tablet stands on the altar in the Temple of the Great Buddha, which is situated upon the north edge of the West Lake. Illustration: a dragon boat race in Foochow. This copy of an old engraving depicts a huge dragon boat passing gracefully up the Min River at Foochow. 20 rowers paddle the long craft, which glides swiftly up the river to the weird music of drums and gongs. End of Chapter 9. End of The Chinese Dragon by Luther Newton Hayes.